What are some ridiculous history facts? Ancient Romans would put sandals on the hands of sleeping people, then tickle their face so they would slap themselves. When the Romans laid siege to the Misera, a real place weirdly enough, they attempted to tunnel into the city. The Mysians released bears into the tunnels. Claudius Drusus died in AD 20 from asphyxiation when he tossed a pear in the air and caught it in his mouth. The pear tree was put on trial, found guilty of murder, and destroyed. The Spartans never built a city wall, figuring that their reputation alone would mean no one would dare attack them. But, during the Persian War, the Persians, who had already burned Athens twice, hired a Greek guide to take them to Sparta. But when they got there, they saw a kinda crap-looking city without even a wall. They figured there was no way this place could be the mighty Sparta they had heard so much about. So they figured the Greek was lying and thus Sparta was spared. Edit. I'm remembering this from reading it in the book Persian Fire by Tom Holland. It's quite possible that I'm misremembering details or that Holland's text identifies this as a legend or story. Still, the book is a fantastic read and I heartily recommend it. In ancient Egypt, servants were smeared with honey to attract flies away from the pharaoh. The first bomb dropped on Berlin by the British during WW2 claimed no human casualties. But it did kill an elephant. The Battle of Bull Run, during the American Civil War, was called the Picnic Battle, because so many civilians from Washington went on picnics on the sidelines and watched. But once the battle actually started, and the Union started to get its ass kicked, they all ran away, running over injured soldiers and dead bodies and generally disrupting the battle. This was actually a relatively common thing during the Civil War. I know it happened at Gettysburg too. At one time there was not only a pope and an anti-pope but also a counter-anti-pope. A Chinese emperor escaped an assassin by running around a pillar. After 2 hours, the assassin got bored and went home, and wasn't charged for his crimes. At U.S. President Andrew Jackson's funeral in 1845, his pet parrot had to be removed because it was swearing. 1904 Olympic marathon in St. Louis. The number 1 finisher drove most of the race. He started the race, got tired and heat exhausted and wanted to drop out. He got in a car to DQ himself and head back to the stadium, but along the way realized he was near the finish line and got out to claim the glory. The number 2 finisher was carried across the finish line by his trainers. On a bogus pseudoscience theory. The trainers had been giving him a mixture of brandy, egg whites, and rat poison instead of water, when it came out that the number 1 finisher had driven most of the course. This guy was given the gold despite the help from his trainers to finish. For some reason, the number 3 finisher was just a regular guy who did nothing unusual. In this case, ordinary was extraordinary. The number 4 finisher was a Cuban mailman, who had raised the money to attend the Olympics by running around his entire country and asking for donations. When he landed in New Orleans, he lost all the money gambling. He managed to scrounge enough to get to St. Louis and attend the Olympics. However, he had no money for athletic gear. So he ran in dress shoes and pants hacked off at the knee by a fellow racer who happened to have a knife. He probably would have come in first had it not been for the hour-long nap he took on the side of the road after eating rotten apples he found at an orchard near the course. The number 9 and number 12 finishers were from South Africa, and ran barefoot. South Africa didn't actually send a delegation. These were students who just happened to be in town and thought it sounded fun. Number 9 was chased a mile off course by angry dogs. Half the participants had never raced competitively before. Some died. St. Louis only had 1 water stop on the entire run. This, coupled with the dusty road, and exacerbated by the cars kicking up dust, led to several fatalities. The Russian delegation arrived a week late because they were still using the Julian calendar until 1918. While effectively the rest of the world had switched to the Gregorian calendar. Credit to you, Draken_Pyrothean for this synopsis, which I have shamelessly stolen and tweaked just a little for clarity and brevity. Colombia has a period in history literally called the Dumb Homeland period because of how incredibly dumb politicians acted at the time. Montenegro technically was in war with Japan for 101 years and they signed a peace treaty in 2006. Montenegro was aligned with Russia in Russo-Japanese War and they declared war on Japan, but they forgot to peace. When the Netherlands was occupied by RHE Nazis in 1940, many people fled to Canada, including Princess Juliana of the Netherlands and her husband Prince Bernhard of Lippe-Biesterfeld. Their daughter, Princess Margriet, was born in Ottawa, not knowing if the baby would be male, and hence the heir to the throne. Canada declared the maternity ward of the Ottawa Hospital extraterritorial, which means it became international territory. This meant that the baby would derive its nationality only from its mother, making it 100% Dutch. The shortest war occurred between Zanzibar and the British Empire, lasting around 45 minutes. There used to be bread stamps, burned into a cooked loaf of bread, to avoid bread fraud, as the government supplied the wheat, flour. But some bakers tried to use sawdust and other ingredients in the bread to make the wheat last longer. The bread stamps were baker-specific, so they could track down where any tainted bread came from. If they were caught, they had to move to another town to make bread, or wait 3 years to continue making bread, if I remember correctly. During the most critical portion of World War II, the Japanese thought they had sunk or disabled 3 American carriers when, in reality, they had only bombed the USS Yorktown 3 times. They were caught with their pants down when the bombs started landing at Midway. As St. Lawrence was roasted to death on a gridiron, he is said to have remarked to his torturers, "I am cooked on this side, turn me over." St. Lawrence is the patron saint of cooks and comedians. During WW2, a bunch of German soldiers got separated in rural Russia. They were trudging through snow with no food or water for days before finally finding a supply drop that missed its mark. They opened it up and found only black pepper and condoms. Edit. For anyone wondering, my source for this is Storm of War by Andrew Roberts. Unfortunately, I can't remember the page number because I read the book a few years ago, but I believe the chapter is called Clash of the Titans. I'm sorry I don't have a more exact source, but I'm a random commenter, not a history teacher. Admiral Zinovy Roshestvensky of the Imperial Russian Navy was so notorious for throwing his binoculars into the sea during fits of rage that his staff always ensured his flagship had an extra crate of binoculars on board. Some more fun stuff about him. He would make up insulting nicknames for ships and officers he disliked, such as the lecherous slut, the sink by themselves squadron, or the guard's uniform hanger. Beat the tar out of crew members that disobeyed him. Would fire live ammunition across the bows of errant ships, and was known to pull other ships alongside his just to scream at its captain in front of the entire crew. Despite all this, he was considered one of the best officers in the Russian Navy and was well liked by his crew, and took full blame for his defeat at the Battle of Tsushima in order to save some officers from the death penalty. So while he may have been hot-headed and had high standards for his crew, he was ultimately a fair and honorable man, just doing the best he could with what he had. And probably better than could be expected of anyone else in his position. And honestly, the Russian 2nd Pacific Squadron's voyage is a ridiculous topic in of itself. The amount of sheer incompetence is comical. Drakiniful has a fantastic video on it. Would highly recommend. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died on the same day, July 4, 1826. The 50th anniversary of them both signing the Declaration of Independence. Adams's last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives. He was wrong by about 5 hours." General Omar Bradley was stopped by MP during the Battle of the Bulge in WW2 due to them thinking he was a Nazi infiltrator. The irony was that he was stopped because he correctly identified the capital of Illinois as Springfield when the officer thought it was Chicago. The Battle for Castle Itter, a castle in Austria where the Wehrmacht and Americans fought side by side with French POWs against the SS. Seriously, someone should make a movie about this. Geographics has a fantastic video on it. Edit. Tactical Toast 7 wrote a much more in-depth explanation of the story. Go check it out. The longest ever U.S. presidential inauguration speech was made by William Henry Harrison on March 4, 1841. The day had terrible weather. Yet Harrison chose to deliver his speech nonetheless, running 8,445 words. In fact, the speech was so long, and the weather so terrible, that Harrison caught pneumonia and died on April 4, making him the shortest reigning U.S. president ever. During the Cold War, there was an idea to drop XL condoms labeled medium onto the Soviets to make them think we were anatomically superior and be more afraid of fighting us. Easily my favorite part of American history. The election of Volodymyr Zelensky as president of Ukraine. People talk about how crazy it is that a reality TV star got elected president of the US. But I think this story is even crazier. Zelensky was the star of a political satire show called Servant of the People, where he played the president of Ukraine. The show's last episode aired on March 28, 2019. 3 days later, Zelensky carried 30% of the popular vote in the first round of elections. Almost double the number carried by the incumbent president Petro Poroshenko in second. 3 weeks later in round 2 of the election, Zelensky won with 73% of the popular vote. This is like West Wing star Martin Sheen defeating George Bush to become president in 2004. Just seems like the type of thing that'll be turned into a great documentary in 50 years. Ancient Greek and Roman marble statues were actually originally painted and were colorful. A lot of the statues' paint faded away and went away over time. Some people cleaned off the paint thinking it was debris or dirt. And other people just plain cleaned and removed all of the paint off of them because they preferred the look of white marble. Rome was actually a very colorful city, and it wasn't all made of just boring plain white marble. The capture of the Dutch fleet at Den Helder on the night of 23 January 1795 presents a rare occurrence of a naval battle between warships and cavalry, in which a French Revolutionary Hussar regiment captured a Dutch Republican fleet frozen at anchor between the 3 kilometers (1.9 miles) stretch of sea that separates the mainland port of Den Helder and the island of Texel. After a charge across the frozen Zuiderzee, the French cavalry captured 14 Dutch ships and 850 guns. A capture of ships by horsemen is an extremely rare feat in military history. In 1908, there was a car race around the world that started in NYC. The route would start in NYC to San Francisco to Valdez, Alaska, across the Bering Strait, through Russia and Europe, with the finish line in Paris. Cars were relatively new and road infrastructure was limited to only metropolitan areas, and even then, a lot of it was cobbled stone. But what you might have thought is, how in the world can a car get across the Pacific? Duh. They would drive across the Bering Strait during the winter when it froze into an ice bridge. Silly. The race began in February 1908 and immediately ran into challenges. To list a few: cars breaking down multiple times, lack of usable roads, car-hating people giving wrong directions, and oh yeah, snow. The first team reached San Francisco in 41 days, but quickly realized that the proposed route from San Francisco to Alaska did not exist. So the organizers allowed teams to ship their cars to Valdez, Alaska, then continue on the ice bridge. Once in Valdez, the teams found out that there is in fact no ice bridge across the Bering Strait anymore because it melted approximately 20,000 years ago. Small oversight. Organizers then allowed teams to ship their cars across the Pacific to Japan, then Russia to carry on. Despite all unpredictable and hilariously predictable odds, the winning team arrived in Paris 169 days later. Highly recommend to listen about it from the Dollop podcast. There's more nonsense that happens that I couldn't fit in, remember. It is told, by Herodotus, that when Xerxes invaded Greece he had to build pontoon bridges, which were destroyed by a storm before completion. Xerxes was so upset at what happened that he had every engineer beheaded and sent soldiers down to whip the sea 300 times for its failure to obey him and comply with his plans. Herostratus is the guy who burned down the Temple of Artemis. The only reason he did it was to have his name written down in history. Canada and Denmark have been playfully fighting for control of a tiny island near Greenland called Hans Island for decades. When the Danish visit, they leave a bottle of Danish schnapps liquor. When the Canadians visit, they take the schnapps and leave a bottle of Canadian Club whiskey and a sign that says "Welcome to Canada." Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was present at 3 different presidential assassinations. After McKinley, he decided not to accept any more invitations. Stalin used to take people on the side to have some drinks with them or invite them to join him for a vacation in his holiday home. Khrushchev wrote about how much he hated those drinking breaks and vacations. Of course, Stalin would try to get you drunk and get info from you. And could decide he wants to kill you during the vacation. But you can't really decline his invitation. Khrushchev would also try to subtly get Stalin drunk as well and get info from him. One time during a vacation with Stalin, Stalin asked him to dance a Ukrainian folk dance in front of a bunch of people. Khrushchev hated dancing, but he had to do it. Before Abraham Lincoln became a politician, he was a champion wrestler, with more than 300 bouts under his belt. Lincoln only lost one match in his career and was inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in 1992. The Massachusetts colony banned celebrating Christmas. During that time period, many people used it as an excuse to get hammered and party. Another tradition was that the young adults would cross-dress, then go door to door singing songs and demanding food. This clearly doesn't fit with Puritan lifestyle. So the governor banned public celebrations. People could still celebrate it in their homes if they didn't get too rowdy. I think it was unbanned when Massachusetts became a state, but didn't become mainstream until Christmas became a national holiday. Nashville briefly legalized prostitution during the Civil War. Union soldiers stationed there kept getting syphilis. So the no prostitutes were put on a large barge in the river. I'm a little fuzzy on what happened after that. But no, it didn't work very well. So it was legalized and prostitutes had to be registered or get a license, I can't remember which, and were required to have STD checks. This lowered the amount of prostitutes with syphilis because it was getting caught and treated. That lowered the amount of soldiers getting syphilis and made the army happy. It was outlawed shortly after the war ended though. A very high-ranking Nazi, Ernst Röhm, was gay, was killed 1934, and Hitler knew about it. But it didn't bother him. Funny how homosexuals were then put in concentration camps. During the Viking era, there was a leader named Sigurd. He allied with a Viking warlord named Thorstein. He wanted to conquer more land and expand his territory. He had already been very successful in doing so. This was until he feuded with another leader called Mael Bucktoothed or Mael Tusk. As his front two teeth were abnormally large and buck-toothed. They decided to settle their matters on the battlefield and both agreed on bringing 40 men each for the battle. However, Sigurd ignored the terms and brought 80 men. Bucktoothed had realized he had been betrayed but did not give up. They killed a number of Sigurd's men. But alas, they were overpowered and were all killed. Here's the catch. After the battle, Sigurd ordered his men to behead all the enemies and tie them to their saddles as trophies. However, as Sigurd rode home in victory, the severed head of Bucktoothed pierced his leg, which led to an infection, killing him soon after. The British once sent a guy to China as a spy so he would uncover the secrets of making tea. Potatoes were not very popular as a food in France. Like they were seen as fit only for animals. Not only that, but they were considered generally not digestible by humans. So a pharmacist named Parmentier knew they were good food and wanted to popularize them among the working class. So he got a 2-acre farm to grow potatoes and placed armed guards around it at all times. People assumed armed guards meant something very valuable was growing there, so they began to steal the potatoes. That's how potatoes became popular in France's working class. There are literally entire books of anecdotes of this sort on Ben Franklin. That man was the Og of trolling. He was so good at trolling under the pen name of a female. Silence Dogood. He received several marriage proposals. Only then did he reveal her true identity. Pepsi once had the 6th largest military in the world after the price of Russian vodka couldn't cover their deal for Pepsi products. So they traded 17 submarines, a frigate, a cruiser, and a destroyer for a trade deal. Fun fact. The president of PepsiCo at the time told the National Security Advisor, "We are disarming the USSR faster than you are." Former U.S. President Andrew Jackson was approached by a man who pulled a gun on him. Smaller history fact: this was the first assassination attempt on a U.S. president. The man pulled the trigger and the cap went off, but the gunpowder failed to light. The man pulled a second gun and fired. But the gunpowder again failed to light. The assassin tried to get away. But not before Andrew Jackson got him and beat the shit out of him with a cane. Karl Marx's great-great-grandson has a YouTube video of him doing parkour. Called ! 2 separate times that we know of. One single man has stopped the world from going into thermonuclear war. During the Cuban Missile Crisis and the American blockade of Russian ships to the island. A Russian submarine on patrol was found by the Americans and was under soft attack. Ships were dropping depth charges on them to try and get them to surface and communicate. Of the 3 officers on board, 2 wanted to fire a nuclear torpedo in retaliation. Vasily Arkhipov disagreed and was able to prevent the launch because it required unanimous agreement. They surfaced and didn't start WW3. The second man was working at an early warning station in the USSR. And they, falsely, detected a missile attack from America. Stanislav Petrov stalled the alarms and prevented a preemptive counterattack. 25 minutes later he got confirmation it was a glitch and had also prevented WW3. There have also been countless other accidents involving nuclear weapons throughout the decades, with many coming dangerously close to triggering an unintentional explosion. We're lucky, to say the least, to have avoided catastrophe so far. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.